Good afternoon and welcome back to our afternoon breakout sessions. I'm Robert Firpo-Cappiello, Editor-in-Chief at Hospitality Technology. My guests are Joe Tenczar of Restaurant CIOs and Brian Pearson of Mendocino Farms. Very psyched to have this conversation. We are digging in to POS software trends buyer's guide. A lot of this information is the result of the Restaurant Technology Network's point of sale buyer's guide work group and ebook. So we're going to be picking these guys' brains and hopefully questions from you. That's why I've got the handheld. So I wanted to kick off with a little bit of data. I'm the co-author at Hospitality Technology of our annual point of sale software trends report, which some of you have, I hope, contributed to in the form of a survey. And I just wanted to share one data set that feels important to me that, I need my reading glasses, sorry. It's 71% of, thank you. See, I told you I'd be funnier than you guys. So 71% of, well, you can read it. You can read it better than I can. 71% of restaurant operators we surveyed, an important business driver for them with point of sale is using data to better understand their, to better understand their guests. 57% enabling new payments and self-service and multi-channels, and 43% moving systems to the cloud. Now, why is this important? This is important because it really underscores that point of sale has evolved. Am I on the right one? No.
There was no slide for that first one. I was just checking.
Interesting. Point of sale has evolved to become a transaction engine. I'm going to move it to these guys to talk about some critical considerations for buying or upgrading point of sale. Joe and Brian, take it away.
Hi. So, whoa, hey. Okay, so first of all, I just do a little demographic survey. How many vendors do we have in here? How many POS people do we have in here? I just want to see if the whole room is filled with POS people so we can make sure we don't badmouth anybody. I'm kidding. All right, not too many, pretty good. All right, how many people in here are maybe looking to change out their POS? And boy, the vendors are like, yeah, baby. All right, good. The rest of you are just interested in seeing Brian on stage? Probably. Yeah.
I mean, that's legitimate.
Yeah.
That's completely legitimate.
Cool. Well, I mean, so beyond, now I get a feel for what's going on here. I think, this could go a bunch of different ways, and we'll probably, well, knowing us, we'll go down some weird path. But, typically what we do with these kind of things is we want to understand what you guys are interested in hearing about. But we'll start with some basic stuff, right? So point of sale over the years has evolved. It used to be sort of a transaction engine. It used to be like a calculator, and it still is sort of the core of all restaurant technology. It's your accounting system, right? That's legit, money in the door that you've got to account for. Over the last, I don't know how many years you pick it, it's really evolved to some things that are beyond just kind of core calculations. I mean, it's, the endpoints have really become pretty, innovative. And I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that, third-party delivery or, that online ordering is as big as it is, or, all of these things that sort of came up, and now the point of sale has to attach to these things. So, I know Brian will talk about how important it is for the open architecture.
Yeah, I think to Joe's point, many of us were buying POS systems, 15 years ago from ex-cash register salesmen, right? SDCR used to sell a lot of Aloha, right? San Diego cash registers. That's how these guys kind of have evolved over time. And now what you see is a much more software-oriented approach, right? Where they're doing development, they're talking about things like sprints, they're talking about things like Scrum. Many of them have changed companies and iterations several times, where when you think about what NCR has gone through over time, and they were they bought the back office systems, and they're continually trying to figure out how they fit in our world. But what we end up with now is I believe there's a very clear delineation between what we all consider a legacy point of sale system and a modern cloud-based point of sale system. And they were developed to try to answer different questions. And so when you think about the legacy solutions, they were really, they were trying to be an evolved cash register. Whereas today, what we're trying to do is figure out how to be better at commerce. And commerce is, mobile, certainly. It's the website, it's in-store, it's the third-party delivery services and the way we interact with them. So the problems that we're trying to solve for today are significantly different than the problems we tried to solve, when a lot of these bigger companies originated. I had a great dialogue with somebody who I consider to be a thought leader in the industry today, Chris Demery. Joe's also a thought leader, but and Chris just said a very interesting and poignant thing. He said, when I went out to look for a point of sale system, I didn't look for a point of sale system. I looked for somebody that could integrate with anything that I wanted to integrate with. I looked for somebody that enabled all of the future thinking that I might have, right? And I thought it was really poignant because if I were to do an RFP today, Joe and I have done a number of RFPs together. Do I care? Well, I care certainly, but am I going to ask a new point of sale vendor, do you have the ability to calculate taxes? Or is that a given? Do you have the ability to have different pricing regions so that I can have one price in Southern California, one price in Northern California? Or should that be a given in the point of sale industry? So I think there are some things that we could identify should be givens, and what we really want to achieve is the ability to be better at commerce in general. And what do we need to do that? So I think that's some of the things.
And I think I always use the term the innovation at the endpoints, right? So you never know what's coming next, and it's really important to have something that can attach to whatever that is. And it's a lot of times they couldn't do that 20 years ago, and now almost every one of them can because they've got some sort of cloud-based open API that can attach to things because a point of sale company, no matter how innovative they are, will never take the place of the innovators at the endpoints, right? There's always going to be the next really cool thing that's out there that the point of sale company may be thought of or may be able to develop at some point, but they didn't do it first maybe. Or maybe they don't want to concentrate on that. Maybe they want to concentrate in a different direction. You want to have the flexibility to be able to attach to whatever comes next, right?
Yeah.
So
one question that I'd like to ask, I know Joe did his little demographics study. Of the folks who are here, I'm assuming the majority of you all are restaurateurs or attached to the restaurant from a technology perspective in some leadership capacity. I guess what I would really like to know is, I'm going to ask I'll ask this a couple ways. Of those of you who are here, given the pandemic, from a percentage standpoint, who is above now, after, kind of where we're at, who is above 40% of their transactions being off-premise? Just a show of hands. So there's very few of you. So so who's above 10% of the transactions being off-premise? Okay.
Brian, you're losing one.
He didn't care anymore. 20%? Okay. So it's interesting. My business in particular, we were 10% going into the pandemic. We're 75% now post-pandemic. I mean, post the first couple of years of the pandemic, right? I know we're still dealing with it in many ways.
Well, it depends on the type of business too, right? Maybe
yeah.
Full serve,
sure.
cash, whatever.
For sure, but it's interesting about the transition, right?
For sure.
Like, we're dealing with business problems today that we've never had in the past. So who knows the term throttling? Is throttling a problem for anybody here? Keep your hands up. Yeah, so throttling is a problem, right? Because we don't have an algorithmic way to identify what can we handle in our kitchens and then push that back to our e-commerce platform and instruct the e-commerce platform to say, hey, right now I can take 15 more orders, but in 20 minutes I can take 30 more orders. We can't do that algorithmically, and that creates a lot of friction in the business.
And that may or may not be the point of sale's fault. Maybe the third party, the DSP's fault. That they can't receive that sort of information. But down, the critical considerations. I shouldn't have done that shot, man. For the point of sale is, you've got this needs, and Brian alluded to it. It's got to be able to perform, taxation. It's got to be able to account for the cash or whatever appropriately or accurately. It's got to be able to give you reports on how much cash came in so you can reconcile at the end of the night. I mean, things are a given. Those are the must-haves, right? Those are the needs. There are wants that go beyond that. I mean, it really depends on the type of business you have. I mean, are you quick serve? Are you full? Are you fast casual? Are you full serve? Whatever those things are, how do you want to operate your business? A lot of that is, all right, in order for me to select a point of sale company, I've got to have one that doesn't necessarily fit every restaurant, but fits my restaurant. And some of those are, these are things that for me, they're a must-have, but there are some things that I can wait maybe a little bit in order to get those in place. Whether maybe that's the DSP throttling. As soon as it's available from the DSP, I want my POS to be able to handle that. I mean, that may be a nice WAP. And then there's the wish list, which is, that could be anything in the world. It could be, whatever. I want a flying point of sale. But I mean, there's a lot to. I mean, I think the wants versus the needs are where you really want to pay attention. The wish list is, it's wishful thinking, and a lot of times you won't ever get to those things anyway.
Yeah, and I think codifying those needs versus wants, like saying, hey, we have to be able to integrate with any of the partnerships that we have today or decide on in the future, right? You might have Olo for your core online ordering. You might have Lunchbox. You might have, a host of different solutions that are out there. That is probably a need that you have that integration capability, right? I think when you start talking about kind of getting into the costs and the server-based versus the cloud-based, you're going to at some point have to ask yourself if you're willing to make the trade-off of giving up your credit card transactions, right? A lot of the point of sale vendors, the modern point of sale vendors that we have today are migrating towards, we want to be your processor, right? Even Olo is migrated towards that, and they're not even just your in-store point of sale system. So you have a lot of the providers migrating to this thing where they say, we want to be your processor, because they recognize that really that's the long-term revenue stream. And so do you want to pay $40,000 up front for an on-prem POS system, or do you want to pay maybe 25% of that up front, but then again, you have this processor relationship that's a little bit stickier and a little bit hard to get in and out of. So you're going to have to weigh some of those decisions along the way. I think to Joe's point, though, all of our businesses are a little bit different, so we have to make the right decision. Are you a little tighter on cash, so you don't want to do the capital expenditure that's giant?
But dude, you have technical resources to be able to handle it. I mean, the size of the business is huge there, right? If you want something easy and you can turnkey, then maybe you do one of the processors-based point of sale companies, right? Because you just plug it in and you go, and it works the way it's supposed to work. You can pay a little more for it. Maybe that convenience is okay for the size of business that you are. When you become mid to enterprise, those nickels really add up. And that's where you really want to pay attention to making a decision based upon, total cost of ownership over a number of years, what that ROI is. I mean, you're going to have more financial input at that point. But, when you're a small, 1-2 store restaurant company, that turnkey may be just golden for you. You don't have an IT staff to be able to handle a massive, enterprise point of sale that's going to take somebody to care and feed for it. It's, that's again, those are decisions that you've got to make based upon the situation that you're in.
Yeah, and you might also have to give up on some features, right? Mm-hmm. Like you may decide that loyalty is one of your biggest drivers in your business. My pitch is changing quite a bit there. If loyalty is one of the key drivers of your business, that becomes then no longer a nice to have or a wish. It really becomes a need, right? Because you have to facilitate the business process. But I guess as we talk about, kind of going down our list a little bit more, and we start to get into the flexible, holistic API.
Let's back up quick, just for cloud-based versus enterprise. Everyone understands the difference. I mean, basically, just quickly, if you don't know, cloud-based is basically the information is processed centrally out there for all of your stores, right? With the enterprise, the server-based, there's a client-server relationship. There's a server, some sort of box that lives in your back office potentially that all the point-of-sale terminals talk to, and that's where everything is done. It's fast. It's been done that way for years and years. You just have limited accessibility to the data that you have from a central standpoint. It requires agents to push things up and down. Reporting isn't as easy from to the central office. You've got to have sometimes dedicated networking. So there's a lot of things that are required in that situation. With cloud-based, it lives out there. Now there's a payoff for
Tenant
that.
versus single tenant.
Yeah, but you've got to have, I mean, you got to make sure you have pretty good internet, right? If you've got a cloud-based point of sale, you got a primary, secondary, maybe sometimes tertiary internet, or you're not going to be able to conduct business. Now there are some offline modes and things like that, but you just got to, those are also decisions that you're going to have to make based upon your business.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, right? I take for granted that all of us are either you're on-prem, which means you have your server, or you're in the cloud. And in the cloud, you might be multi-tenant or single-tenant, which might mean that you either share the environment with a bunch of other restaurant companies, or you have your own environment. And that can be important when things like upgrades and so forth happen, right? It can be important when you have certain amounts of volume, multi-tenant versus single tenancy.
Being able to test something before it goes into production.
Absolutely, being ready to adopt it, right? And so some of those things have to be thought through as well. But alongside of this, I think it's kind of it's just a characteristic of the nature of a modern cloud-based point of sale system versus an on-prem point of sale system is this flexible integration. Yeah. You get away from the conversation of talking about integrations with on-prem to API on off-prem, right? So a lot of the legacy on-prem point of sale systems, they don't really give you a tool set that says, hey, I can attach a software development kit and I can go out and get this piece of data and push it over here. That's a modern notion, right? Versus a legacy point of sale system, it might take 6 months to build an integration and have it certified. And then once it's certified, you can conduct business, but if anything changes in the environment, you have to revisit it, right? So that can add cost and it can add friction and it can add time. So for the restaurateurs out there, when you start thinking about your development resources and really what business you're in, are you in the business of building software? So you have a bunch of development guys or folks. Are you in that business, or are you in the business of facilitating the business of the restaurant? I think frequently becomes a pretty important question. Like the buy versus build dialogue. Yep. And what specific business are you in is a really important question to answer.
Yeah. I mean, there are companies that are enterprise that build their own point of sale, or they buy a point of sale and they basically orphan it off and they own the code at that point and they care and feed for it. And they have hundreds of developers in some cases to be able to do that. So there's no one size fits all point of sale for sure.
So Joe, would you like to address the new demands?
Well, I mean, I think we talked a lot about those. I mean, so the innovation at the endpoint is important. Thank you, Brian, for that introduction.
It's my pleasure.
Because he didn't put the slides together. So mobile ordering, mobile payment, those are sort of newer features that point of sales didn't have, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Today, it's almost table stakes, right? If a point of sale doesn't have at least tableside payment, then they're probably going to lose some business for sure. Tableside ordering is now, I mean, it's all over the world. It's natural in almost every other country except for the United States right now. But it's gaining traction here as well. And and I think people are now okay with the server having this in their hand and doing this while they're talking to them. In the old days, it was maybe rude to do that. I don't know. But there's some benefits of that from a labor standpoint, at least on paper. And we've consulted with a lot of people over the years that say, I want to do this tableside ordering thing, tablet ordering, because I can keep my best 5 servers on the floor all the time, and we just have runners do the food, and we're going to make tons more money. We're going to have better table turn, all that stuff. That sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on how good operations is and how much they adopt it. Technology is only as good as the training and the operations and the support behind the technology, right? Over the years, it's been probably harder to deal with change management, within a business than it is to implement new technology.
Yeah, we frequently say that the pandemic gave us a lot of permission to try some new things, right? So I know many of you, like us, have QR codes on your tables that allow a guest to pull up a menu or to place orders or to complete payments, et cetera. For any of those of you out there in the crowd who have a QR code on your table and it's a PDF, please stop. It's really not a good experience for the guest. I'm zooming in, zooming out. It's a pain. Go mobile responsive. Pay some kid, out of a CS degree to build a mobile responsive site for you. There's a lot of solutions out there, but I do think that they've given us that permission, right? And so we need to explore a little bit and test. In our business, they gave us, we have a test bed restaurant where we try a lot of new things and we see does it resonate with the guest. We put in a QR code for signing into the table instead of having LRS pager. And for our business, that made a lot of sense because we were losing pagers left and right. Last year alone, we were going to spend $60,000 on replacing pagers. Oh. And when we put in a QR code, 92% of our guests adopted it who were eligible in California, right? It was a little lower in Texas, a little higher in Dallas, a little lower in Houston. But still, we felt like it would be a success at 60% because now we didn't have this extra technology, but we had people signing in and saying, hey, I'm at this table, table 12, table 13, whatever it was. And we were able to facilitate the experience at a much lower cost. So I think as you go into this, dialogue of, hey, we're interested in looking at a new point of sale system, going back up to needs, wants, desires, wish list, et cetera, make sure that you bring all your stakeholders into place. Make sure you engage operations, you engage marketing, you engage training and development, and you really do understand what are their fundamental needs. Once you understand the fundamental needs, you can kind of step back and say, okay, we don't necessarily need to ask about taxation. That should be a given at this point. But then put that out to those providers and kind of understand what the field looks like. I mean, right now we're in a pretty good place, I think, for the buyers in the group because there's a lot of choice. It's just, what do you want to deal with, right?
Yeah. And there's some great tools out there that help you with RFPs now. And whether or not you need an RFP is, there's a lot of factors in that too. There's RTN put together a guide, RTN, basically the buyer's guide for, I don't even know what it's called, but it's a buyer's guide for RFP buyer's guide or something for point of sale. Although it's not specifically about point of sale, maybe mistitled a little bit, but it's a really good kind of primer on the things you may want to consider before you go down that road, because it's a long and expensive road. But one of the key points there is what Brian just said, is you make sure that you get the right stakeholders involved and make sure you get them involved early. Because the more buy-in you have at the beginning, the more support you're going to have as you try to roll this stuff out. It's never a good idea to say IT said we're going to do this, we're going to do it, because it's not going to be successful, right? But if operations is involved in that decision, or your key franchisees are involved in that decision, or those, now you've got some traction behind it. Because hey guys, this wasn't an IT decision, this was a group decision, and you were on that panel, by the way, right? So there's definitely a lot of benefit of the right stakeholders involved. And then there's all kinds of things you can do with weighting, the requirements, and how important is it to this group versus that group. And I mean, it can get highly complex. I mean, I've done an RFP before, probably some of you received it and hate me still, but it was about 2,000 questions long. It was ridiculous. I mean, it was total granularity that probably didn't need to occur, but at the time, this was probably 15 years ago. And at the time, it was, the more thorough you were, the better off you thought you'd be. But that was a nightmare putting that together for sure. Don't propose you do that. But there are actually tools that exist. Olive, I think, is Olive's great. I mean, basically, it's all online, and you put in your requirements, and sometimes they preload a lot of that stuff for you, and your stakeholders can log in and weight things on their own. The vendors can go in and answer the RFPs. Tools like that make that whole process a hell of a lot easier. And I don't know if anyone else is doing that right now, but I know that tool exists. So.
Yeah. So I guess before Joe and I weigh into anything else, does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask? Or it can be a group dialogue too that you can propose to other folks in the room.
I've got a microphone if anybody needs it, but we have a good problem to have. We have so many people in the room that getting to you with the mic is going to be a bit of a challenge. So I'd say call out your questions to these guys. Our next section is in fact called Ask Us Anything.
Wow, we are right on schedule. Phil's been texting. Are you texting questions, Phil? Oh, good. Sure. Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think it depends on what IT resources you have, or what resources externally that you have that could potentially do any kind of customization for you. How important that customization is, how much that customization would cost. There's a lot of factors to it, right? I would probably choose something that had less customization than start with something that needs a lot of customization, because then you're basically, you're creating a company that may not exist, and probably if you're the only customer that wants that, may not be able to support that long term.
Yeah, I'm always cautious with technical debt. Whatever you build, right? Whether you go to a developer and you say, hey, I need you to build this mobile app that talks to my point of sale system, and it's going to be just mine. I'm going to be the only person who uses it. That's a tremendous amount of technical debt that you have to support forever. You know, I remember the old days when we used to talk about Ruby Tuesdays, right? And they built this empire of technology because they wanted it to work exactly the way they wanted it to work. Yeah. So what we frequently do is I'm kind of the red team guy, and I'll challenge the organization about, do you really need that? Or do you want it because it existed in the last platform that you have? Yeah. So let's dig into what was the business case for that feature, and does that feature still exist? The need for that feature still exist today? Or do we just think it does because that's what we're used to?
And
sometimes you really got to challenge.
You ask the vendor, I mean, this is my objective. How do you solve that objective? It may not be exactly the way you've done it in the past, but there may be better ways of doing things. And I found that 100 times, just finding like, wow, I didn't even consider doing it that way. That's a heck of a lot easier than what I've been doing. And now there's no customization involved. So yeah, so try to do that as much as you can, for sure. It's a great question. Thank you. Sorry, Tim. Surprise, you got a question? That's weird. Yeah.
One way of thinking about all the technology that's come into the restaurant industry over the past couple of years was COVID driven, right? We shut down the restaurants and we suddenly had this need to order online and the like. When we look at 2023, COVID's winding down, inflation seems to be the big problem right now. Profitability of the restaurant.
Sure.
So I was curious to see, how do you see technology requirements being driven by that?
Yeah.
I think one is really labor cost, right?
Well, hold on. So just to be clear, I mean, this is a point of sale conversation. Not that we won't talk about it, but more efficiency on the selling side, on the omni-channel side, for sure. Any kind of efficiency that you can gain there. Most of typically the way I think about it is your margins are handled much of the time. Wow, can't speak. Much of the time on the back office side, right? That's where you're controlling your labor and your costs and your recipes and your TVA and all the kind of stuff that talks about how much money you actually make. But the POS can provide a lot of that information, but if you take advantage of the data that it's giving you, right? So if I understand the menu economics and pricing elasticity and all of those things that I'm getting from my point of sale and understanding how when I move this, what happens, but it's analytics attached to all the data that you're getting from your point of sale. But I mean, the back office is tons of ways you can.
Yeah, but I think when you're talking about the point of sale in particular, right, in the context of this conversation, you start to think about, depending on brand. This all depends on brand and style. Full service, quick service, fast casual. If you can now automate a portion of that work, right? So maybe you have one terminal where there's an order taker standing behind it, very friendly and smiling and happy, and the other terminal you can flip over and allow it to be a kiosk, right? So now all of a sudden you can still facilitate the same number of orders potentially as two people, but you've only got one person at the station. That's a tremendous impact on labor. And we do things like tip sharing. So everybody shares in the tip pool. Okay, well, fewer people in the tip pool means everybody's making more money, right?
That table-side ordering thing.
Table-side ordering. Yeah, QR codes, ordering at the table. So I think, the technology can facilitate a reduction in cost. We have two costs in the business, right? It's food cost and labor. That's really what we can work on. I don't think we can do much with food costs from that aspect, from the point of sale as much. Maybe being better at commerce and selling the things that our guests want more, the things that drive affinity and affiliation. Yeah, higher margin items. But as it relates to point of sale and the current things we deal with, for all of those of us who do business in California, right, the FAST Act, I mean, it's coming whether we like it or not. And whether it's this year or in 24, when all of a sudden McDonald's and CKE and everybody else has to pay $22 an hour, I'm trying to hire the same employee, right? So if I'm trying to hire that employee, I should figure out a way to get to $22 an hour faster. And I'm going to have to use some of the same automation tricks they're using. Terminals that go from a terminal to a kiosk, a large terminal, in the front. So we're going to have to get better at our jobs to make things more efficient, or we'll get crushed and we'll end up going away.
Yeah, I mean, look at like Bar Taco's they've changed their model completely, right? And it's all based on technology that exists. So labor efficiency is huge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're, in the old days where KDS had incredibly tremendous value, right? Because you bump it and then it goes to the next station, gets to the next station, they bump it, gets to the expediter, they bump it. Well, now when so much of our business has gone to off-premise, they aren't using those same notions anymore. So they're going bump, 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 and they're sending it down. Yep. So we're looking at things like camera vision and AI to help tell us from a manufacturing standpoint, who are the restaurants who get from segment 1 to segment 2 faster, segment 2 to segment 3 faster, and then comparing everybody in the business against them. So we're having to get a little bit more efficient and smarter at our jobs as well, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, utilizing the data that you get out of that, you can tell who the best servers are based upon the data that you're getting. Who's got, if you can get those, the laggards up to at least average, you can earn so much more money just based on, you can get all that from the information that you have if you've got the right tools to extract it, right?
Integrated digital menu boards, right? If we can change an MPI, we can do a menu price increase, 14 to 15 weeks faster than what we did last year. We can generate a couple $1 million more in revenue.
What about dynamic pricing? I mean, there's another
absolutely.
option, right? An opportunity.
Demand pricing, right? So there's a lot of opportunities for us. But if the POS doesn't facilitate that, if they aren't a good integration partner, if they don't have robust APIs for things that we aren't sure we need yet, then we're going to be ending up holding the bag and going, okay, what compensating thing can I do to offset the weakness of the POS that I have that doesn't do those things? Right. I think that's something that should stress all of us out. It stresses me out every day. And I'm constantly thinking about, okay, well, there's going to be some new thing that comes along, like third-party delivery services 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, that the industry isn't prepared for, we aren't prepared for, we can't facilitate. And so then our guests are paying for our inefficiencies. And we have to do MPIs to pay for our inefficiencies. And then we're less compelling. So, any, yeah?
Right.
What are your thoughts on taking most all of the tech stack from one vendor versus
I think that goes back to sort of my comment about turnkey or not turnkey. I mean, there's one throat to choke is certainly beneficial to some people. But if you want best of breed, then the integration is important. But it's a lot easier than it used to be to have best of breed because of the open architecture nowadays that's offered. In the old days, it was much more difficult to do that because you've got to actually pay for those 6-month integrations between vendors that may or may not be friends. But I think it really is a choice based upon how important that vendor is versus what kind of efficiencies you can gain either from a unified contract or from a single relationship with a vendor. Those may be very important to certain people. But all eggs in one basket isn't necessarily a great thing either. It's much more difficult to change out an entire stack if something's not working than it would be to change out a component of the stack.
Yeah, we're actually doing a lot of modernization in our business. And what we've found pretty consistently is the point of sale vendors that we're talking to are saying, hey, call it online ordering or our loyalty isn't the greatest. It's functional. And for a lot of companies that works. We wouldn't recommend it for you. And we hear that. And I prefer that, right? Like, be honest with me. Tell me about your warts. Tell me where you're not excelling. And then if we're focusing on your business about where it excels and you have good API in place, you have the ability for me to snap in whatever else I want, that's a win. And I prefer those honest conversations.
Yeah, and it's a good point because if you're not ready potentially for a full-fledged CRM, but your point of sale vendor has one, you may as well try that one as long as you can extract that if you need to pretty easily. Right? That's a great place to start, right?
Yeah. I had when Joe and I were full-blown consulting in the first year of the pandemic, I had a customer who never had online ordering in their business, and their point of sale was not modern. They couldn't facilitate it. They couldn't facilitate online ordering. So the new point of sale partner that we identified, they brought in a single terminal and basically turned themselves into a third-party DSP kind of function, and we turned on online ordering. In the first year of the pandemic, they generated over $2 million of revenue on that new channel that they never had in their business before. And I think we're called upon to do that, right? Like, figure it out. Come up with something to enable a process or enable revenue that didn't exist before. Look, I think some of these POS vendors can really get creative and really help you in your business. It just depends where your business is at in its cycle.
I wanted to follow up on, you raised the difference between server-based and cloud-based and potential cost differentials. Now, without getting into brands or specific pricing, I think maybe everybody would be interested to hear a little bit about the potential percentage difference.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not going to give you an apples to apples, but what I will tell you is one of them is generally more capital intensive. So you might go out and say, hey, I'm going to spend $40,000 or $50,000, depending on the number of terminals, right? That's the licenses and all that stuff. I'm going to spend a big chunk of capital on an on-prem system versus I'm going to go out to another cloud-based point of sale, get software as service, get hardware as service, and my cost of entry is going to be significantly less, maybe 15 to 25% of the actual on-prem solution. But to do that, you're also giving up something. You're going to give up your processing, right? Which in the longer term may have a different impact on you, right? So you may say, okay, hey, I'm getting into this store, new store opening for 25% the cost on capital, but the lead on the processing might ultimately be greater after 5 or 6 or 7 years. So it's not always a direct comparison. And
it's also,
sometimes it might not. You might get somebody who gives you parity on processing.
But it's also, depending if it's a cloud-based system, generally they're lighter at the client, so you can buy less expensive hardware, right? And that's really where it's coming from.
That's a great
And you
point.
don't have a server in the back office.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of the folks that I've seen here today about, my desire for PoE equipment, like no power getting run for an NSO, and a manager, if they have to swap it out, it's one cord that they unplug and plug in a new solution. Like, I'm super excited about PoE equipment or lighter footprint hardware, to Joe's point.
We have another question right here.
Yes. Hey guys and everyone. Jeff from U.S. Bank, Elevon. So we're merchant processing, and just reflecting on your comments and so forth. And I just wanted to add to the whole room. So we offer an end-to-end solution. We're payment agnostic. We're part of U.S. Bank, so we own the entire. We're the only.
I'm sorry,
bank.
are you selling?
Is there a question?
No. I guess this is just my presentation.
Oh, you're not presenting here today.
Yeah. No. You
have a
guys are
question,
good.
we'd love to answer.
Yeah. No. We'll be at the reception.
We'll visit you in
Great.
the
Okay.
exhibit hall.
Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else want to sell anything?
Yes. Yes. No.
Any other?
Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. Sorry, gentlemen here. Yep, please.
With the Wilson shirt?
No, he.
Yep. Well, do you want to start? I mean, I've got my opinion is it's probably going to be more open architecture from a DSP standpoint as well, where there's going to be any point of sale could just automatically attach to a DSP. Now, the DSPs aren't necessarily going to try to make it super easy because they own that customer, not you. So there's not some information won't ever be shared, like some specific customer information that is supposed to go back to your restaurant. Sometimes it's their proprietary information. So, but I think it's getting closer to the point of sales directly integrating with the DSPs.
Yeah, I think the DSPs are feeling a lot of pressure right now, right? Because they didn't start off with a business model that was going to generate positive revenue, right? They started off with an investment to say, hey, we're going to build this thing because we think the industry needs it. And many of them are still not profitable. They're doing it, their business, they're doing commerce because they think that the need is out there and eventually it will become profitable. So what they're going through frequently is this cycle of how do we make software that integrates well and facilitates, they're a marketing platform. The DSPs are just a marketing platform. So they want to be the marketing platform and facilitate that commerce. They don't want to deal with any of the headaches involved, and then they want to pay these drivers a menial payment relative to the total transaction. And I think the challenge for them is we now all say, okay, well, if you're going to charge me 10% or 15%, then I have to charge the customer that additional 15%, which makes it less attractive to the customer. The customer says, wait a second, I can go directly to your store and pay 15%, 20% less. I'm going to do that. And so while we're in this bubble of customers seeking convenience, I personally believe that bubble is not going to live forever because the prices are going to continue to climb. We're all having to pay more in wages. As the wages increase, so does the cost of our menu item. And I think the DSPs are getting a little pinched.
How many people use Travelocity or Expedia? I mean, it's more or less the same thing, right? And they're still around. So I'm not so
they're
sure
still around,
that they're going away.
But 2 people used it.
They're still around, Brian.
Yeah, they are still around, but I think as their usage declines, the pressure on them increases.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question. I think the integration piece, they are incentivized to make that integration as seamless as possible. I know a number of restaurateurs that I am close to that will shut off the DSPs first if their business is impacted, and then later on they'll shut off their own OLO if their in-store business is significant enough. So if they make that integration more seamless and they can respect throttling, and eventually we can get to algorithmic throttling more significantly, then I think it's better for them, better for us.
Well, I'm not sure they're so inclined to start interfacing with the whole throttling thing because they're the first ones to go.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
we shut, I know
Right.
a couple of restaurateurs who shut them off for all future orders.
Yeah.
We joined that crowd I think 2-3 months ago because they couldn't facilitate the throttling well enough.
Yeah.
So we just said future orders are off. And it hasn't hurt us a bit.
Interesting. I'm interested to see how that's going to play out. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, honestly. But there are people that only order from Uber Eats or from DoorDash.
And they're an Uber loyalist,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're not a Sonny's or a Mendocino Farms loyalist.
Right.
So we probably have time for one more question.
We do? Oh wow. Okay. We probably have more than that, don't we?
I don't know.
I don't know.
When are they gonna
How long are we
kick
up
us
here? Should goad him into that.
I'm a vendor. I'm a vendor, okay?
Thank you. Full disclosure.
So, are you concerned about the solvency of some of these companies that are giving away hardware? If you look at their stock prices over the last year or two, I mean, they've been going down. It doesn't seem like it's sustainable.
I don't want to single out certain vendors. I mean, I think I know who you're implying, but each business has to find the model that works best for them, and it's whether to be all things to all people is one model. One is to be the best at what you do is a model, and one is to become a processor and a point of sale is a model. And I don't think I've got the qualifications to discuss the solvency of any one of those business models.
I'll answer from my perspective, John. If I went to my board and made a recommendation for any vendor, whether it's point of sale, back office, you name it, and I wasn't able to communicate their capitalization,
Sure.
I most likely wouldn't get past the 4th question.
Oh yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements to solvency, right? There's what is your current capitalization? What's your balance sheet look like? How many customers do you have that are actually paying for the product? Like that's a significant and meaningful question.
It's a great question because we didn't talk about that when we talked about RFPs and bringing in the needs and the wants. I mean, you have to really evaluate the solvency of the company that you're dealing with. How is their support? Ask your vendors. Don't just rely on the people that they give you as references. It's huge. Yeah. Fair.
Yeah, that's one pitch that I'd love to make is for those of you who aren't involved in RTN, I think it's a great organization that gives you access to a lot of restaurateur technologists, right, that you can then freely go ask those questions to. I also encourage everybody here to leverage LinkedIn as a resource. You know, I've had a number of people reach out to me, and I've reached out to a number of people in the industry, and sometimes I'm second or third or fourth connection, and I just go, hey, you know, I'd like to connect and talk to you about what you do for technology. What do you think? You know, just reach out. I mean, most of us are pretty open. You know, I know, you know, Chris Demery, who, you know, I've seen around the show. I don't think he's in here, but like, I was a fanboy of his when he created the status of your order for Domino's, you know, and yet he's here. Like, so to me, he's kind of a rock star. You know, when you start talking about some of the guys that, you know, preceded Phil at CKE, I mean, like those guys were rock stars too, you know. Tom would tell you the deepest intricacies of any technology that you could ever hope to ask for. Phil won't tell me anything, but you know. No, I just say, you know, treat the industry as open. We're all in the restaurant business. Reach out to one another like we do, and be available to people who reach out to you and talk about the problems, because most of us are dealing with the same basic problems.
Yeah, for sure.
This was fantastic. Thank you guys very much.